You're listening to Served Up, a podcast that features inspiring beverage professionals and topic experts that share their passions through meaningful conversations. I'm your host, Bridget Albert, also known as a Market Fresh Mixologist, an industry mentor with decades of experience. Grab a cocktail and sit back. Let's learn how we can make a positive impact in our industry. Hey y'all, it's Bridget here. My co-hostess Jessica Baldo-Reggio and I had a great time chatting with Sonja Magdevski, founder and winemaker of Casa Dumps Wines, brings a journalist's curiosity and a storyteller's heart to every bottle she creates. Through her labels, she explores purity of place and the power of thoughtful winemaking. Her passion lies in crafting small lot wines that reflect both her deep connection to the vineyard and her belief in the emotional impact of wine. So sit back, relax, pour yourself a glass of Clementine Carter, and enjoy the show. Sonja, welcome to the show. Jessica and I are both really happy to have you on this episode.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Can you tell our listeners about your background? Where did you grow up? Tell us something interesting about yourself, and then what got you introduced into the world of grapes and wine?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Michigan. My whole family is from former Yugoslavia. Today, that country is called North Macedonia. And I'm first generation born in the States. So I sort of grew up with two identities. And when I was younger, I used to think that it was 50% of this and 50% of that. And ultimately, really, you're 100% of, I'm 100% sort of born and raised Detroit American. And then the other 100% is North Macedonian or Macedonian, my family's ethnicity. And growing up, it was such an absolute gift to be able to go back and visit each summer my family and my grandparents and learn about where my parents grew up and the village life and what they did. And so ultimately, from a really young age, I wasn't quite in tune with sort of what I would end up doing, but the purity of flavors and the purity of experiences and the purity of just gathering together with family and friends. I mean, it was always a very common experience. People were always over. We were always kind of, I guess we would say, throwing parties, but for us, it was just your neighbors were over and your family was over. And so it was just a very kind of pure experience full of flavor and just intensity of relationships. And so that's ultimately, now what I carry through into wine and making wine and working with grapes and working with vineyards is that purity of all of it, and it all has to work together or else none of it works. And so, but ultimately I didn't have any intention of sitting here right now talking to you about vineyards because of my background. I went to University of Michigan for undergraduate work and I studied political science. And then I went to graduate school. I studied journalism. Two things happened in grad school that were very, very formative. One, I wrote for an agricultural magazine on campus. Michigan State is a very big ag school. And so my job was to take the research that the scientists were doing in agriculture and other sort of basic science stuff related to agriculture and translate their work into kind of layperson's terms. So everybody understood why the researchers were doing what they were doing. And I loved that job. After that job, I thought if anyone ever complains about the price of eggs, they have no idea what kind of goes involved in it. And so I loved agriculture and I just sort of fell in love with it. And I had a Fulbright scholarship to study ethnic issues in Macedonia. So ultimately, I thought that I would work for the UN and solve world peace. And then at the end of grad school, I moved to California, which I thought would be kind of this idea of this cabin in the woods and this temporary experience until I finished my thesis and finished all of these projects. And then I would go back and kind of go live in some village in Eastern Europe and solve, minor conflicts that would help me sort of create this template for world peace. And then I would run the UN and we'd live happily ever after. But then I moved to California and I helped plant a tiny vineyard. And then I thought, oh, they don't need me. This is pretty cool. And that's how it happened. That was 21 years ago.
That's amazing. From the UN to, running a vineyard. I think that we have a lot to unpack there. You just breezed over, like, I really wanted to create world peace. I think we still need that, Sonja. Maybe we can do it through wine. I don't know.
I always say one bottle at a time, world peace, one bottle at a time. We sit, like even now, we're sitting, we're having conversation, we're listening, we're learning about each other. And that's fundamentally the whole idea of relationships and life on this planet is community and friendship and understanding. And when we have a glass of wine or gather around a bottle, we just sit and for the most part, your phones are tucked away, you're engaged in this moment, you drop your shoulders, you're relaxed, you can share some jokes and all that fun stuff.
I'm so curious, Sonja. So poli-science, journalism, agriculture, all of that led you to California, and yet you stayed in California, right? And this is where you're growing and you're winemaking now. So I know how you got there. Why stay there and why grow grapes there?
Great question, because it is, I always say that everyone loves their wine growing region and says it's the best and number one. And everyone's right? You commit to a place because you love what happens there and you understand what happens there. And whether it's, you made a choice to move because there was something there that you found intriguing. Or for me, again, before I came to California, I drank wine, but I would have like $10 and, in grad school, and I would go to the store and I'd be like, I got $10, what should I buy? And they'd be like, oh, try this red from blah, blah, blah. And I would say, great. And I would walk away and we'd share it with friends, but I didn't know anything beyond that. Right. And so I came to California. Again, I thought it would be temporary. I would just kind of have this experience. And then I helped plant this tiny vineyard. I was working at a flower shop, part-time, and then finishing my thesis. And just, again, kind of being away from the everyday. I had a tremendous opportunity to come out and live for free. So, I can't, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have been in California. It was just like, oh, come hang out here. We have this space, get away and kind of have this quiet time. And I just took full advantage of it. And in that period of time, I worked at this flower shop, and this gentleman lived down the street, and he was planting a vineyard in his backyard. And he thought because I worked at this flower shop, I knew all about plants and horticulture. I didn't know, and I could make a bouquet, I could clean roses, I could sweep the floor. But I didn't know anything about sort of growing grapes. And I thought, well, you're planting a vineyard, all about farming and agriculture, and you're planting a vineyard. And so I thought, oh, I'm available to help, on such and such date if you need some help. I was really intrigued. And he said, yes. He's like, all my friends decided they were going to help me, but now when I actually need the help, no one's showing up. So I'm by myself, and on Monday I have 800 vines coming. So can you help me? I was like, yep. And so the two of us planted this vineyard, digging holes and planting these vines in the ground. And I knew nothing about sort of what it means and why. I thought, oh, I'm going to learn something pretty interesting here. Another aspect of agriculture that I loved. And then we just kind of fell into this rhythm. And in that so doing, there was this really lovely, very tiny garagist wine community that had formed. And where we were, Santa Ynez Valley, was an hour and a half north. So I went to the Santa Ynez Valley for the first time, and I was like, this is the most magical place ever. I had never seen it before. I didn't even know it existed in Santa Barbara wine country. And so it was one of those very sort of formative experiences where your eyes open up and you think, what just happened? And the first time I went to Santa Ynez, I really had this very unique feeling. And I'm sure you both have had this experience in your life at some point. where something struck you and I thought, oh, I'm going to be here. I don't know how, I don't know why, but this place it was like I was meant to kind of be connected to it. Anyway, so we would just kind of source grapes and we would all pitch in for, 2 tons of Syrah, whatever it was. And we'd bring it back, truck it down back into the garage, and we'd all have our own little half ton and, smash it here and little basket press. I mean, it was very garagist. And then the more I got involved, the more I became intrigued. We're working on this vineyard and planting this vineyard and pruning and, seeing the challenges of that. I mean, the vineyard was a total disaster. Like, it doesn't exist anymore because everything about it was in the wrong place, wrong time. But it was very educational in terms of place matters. Where you do something is very foundational. And so just that discovery of, before I had no idea that you could actually be a quote unquote winemaker. That was a job. I thought you needed an estate and a chateau and a history and, great grandparents who planted the vineyard 500 years ago. But we're in California. We're, crazy people out here, and people do crazy things and there's no rules. And so people just plant grapes wherever the hell they want to plant grapes. And that sort of openness and the people in Santa Barbara wine country and their welcoming nature, really just, I kept coming back to it and kept coming back to it and kept coming back to it. And so, at some point I was, making wine on the side and waiting tables and writing and trying to kind of piece together an existence. And then in 2011, I thought, I have to figure this out. I have to kind of be an adult. I have to make a decision. I'm either going to do this or I'm not going to do this. And what's holding you back? And why are you afraid of this? So I was ultimately born and raised in wine in kind of, the Santa Ynez Valley. My first understanding of what anything meant, agriculture on this scale. I'd planted this tiny half acre in the backyard. And then when you go to sort of a true kind of vineyard, 50 acres, 30 acres, 100 acres, your mind is sort of blown. You're like, oh, and that's small comparison to, the thousands of acres that are planted. And so it was so awakening and eye-opening. And I just fell in love with this area. And after a while, you just kind of get involved, like my parents, when they came to the States back in the 60s, I said, didn't you ever want to go back? And, didn't you think you'd go back to Macedonia and kind of live your life? And they said, that was the plan. We were going to come here and make some money and hang out for 5 years and then go back and continue our existence. But then, you fall into a place and you fall in love with the place and then you just kind of stick around. So that was a long answer to tell you why California.
I love it though. So how did that first vintage turn out? Like, how did it go? And like, how many things did you learn about yourself in that year, especially for winemaking?
Oh gosh. Yeah. Compared to now, again, 20 years, it's been 20 years, a little over 20 years. And so it's astonishing, what you know and what you don't know. And obviously the more you know you don't know. And that's the beauty of this whole business. But, I guess when you first start, you sort of go by the book. You're like, oh, the recipe calls for X. I'm going to do this and we're going to do this. And then we're going to measure the temperature every 3 hours. And we're going to punch down 3 times a day because so-and-so said so. And we're going to do X, Y, Z. So you just kind of follow the system because you don't know anything else, right? Particularly not growing up into it, not having seen any other example of the nuance of what takes place. And so, it was fine. It was delicious. It was good. Again, when we started, it wasn't this idea of we're going to have a winery. It was your friends getting together. We're going to have some parties. We're all going to get together and harvest fruit. And it was just about fun and community. And so, from then until now, wine, particularly on the level that we're all working, on any level, really. It's about nuance. Like nothing is arbitrary. Everything we do has a reason and an intention. And we're working with nature. And so it's this idea of how do you control the things that you can control when there's everything that's out of your control. And so I guess it was cool, but it was just the stepping stone of sort of understanding like, oh, you don't know anything. looking back with the time, you think, oh, I got this. We made wine.
So I think it's sometimes best that you don't know what you're getting into. If you look back on your career, you might be like, holy shit. Okay. If I would have not known, I wouldn't have jumped in with 2 feet.
Bridget, I always say, if I knew then what I know now, I probably never would do this job or be in this profession. And like you said, thankfully, you don't know all the ridiculous challenges ahead of you on every level. You just know one step at a time. You have to jump over this hoop, and then you got the next one, and then you do the next one. Oh, that happened. Oh, okay. And ultimately, I'm a self-funded sole proprietor. And so there is no plan B. It's not like, oh, well, if this doesn't work, I'll just go do X. Or, it's like, well, I've committed. And so this has to work. So you adjust one way or the other to kind of figure out like, well, what's the new priority here? So.
Yeah. Can you tell our listeners, with everything that you have going on a day-to-day, from creative work to business, to the boring stuff, the paperwork, like everything, how do you stay grounded?
I stay grounded. I'm a very, very, very social person. I love people. I have a tasting room in a little town called Los Alamos in the Santa Ynez Valley. I've had that for 14 years. And if I'm not working somewhere else, like if not, I'm not working, with Jessica in Miami, anywhere else, I'm there all the time. And people are like, well, why are you here? And I'm like, this is my job. But why would I not be here? This is what I do. I run this tasting room, and we have a, small and great team, and we have a little restaurant and a little wine bar, and I love people, and I love engaging people, and I love sharing with people what we do and what our friends do in the world of wine and yummy treats. And so every day I'm pretty much out, right? Like I'm out every night, every day. It's like I'm out. And so the funny little secret is that every morning I need very, very, very quiet time. I didn't quite make that connection for a long time, but I knew that every morning, like I don't listen to anything in the morning. There's no news on, there's no music. It's a very quiet, kind of solitary morning. And I will exercise, I'll go for a run, or I'll do something, whatever I have time for, whether it's 10 minutes or an hour, it's kind of my mental health check. And so people think, oh, you're working. But for me, it's very calming, and it's very meditative, and like, it's very relaxing to kind of have that moment away outside. I don't carry my phone with me. I'm not, texting or calling. And so it's a very quiet moment that I have each morning. I mean, it's not ideal every day. It's not like, oh, I can, luxuriate in this. But it is that time because, ultimately I know that once I leave my front door, my time is not my own anymore. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
Out with people. So I can't stop and be like, oh, I'm going to grab lunch, or I'm going to go to yoga class, or I have to get all that, whatever I need done before. So then I can kind of go out into the world. And so I'm kind of selfish with that time. I mean, I will say, but if I have to get up 2 hours earlier, then I get up 2 hours earlier, but that's what kind of keeps me grounded and solid for that. And then also like family, and friends. We joke. My husband and I joke, my mom's pretty hard. I mean, my mom is the most loving, amazing woman on the planet, but very straight. God, you look exhausted today. Why you look so exhausted? Oh, thanks, Mom. Or whatever it is, So she always keeps, if there's anything happening, like she'll put you back in line. And thankfully, she works with us every day, so it's a total gift. But
a mother's love, right, Sonja?
Yeah.
I want to talk about the grapes that you've selected. So they're not your typical, right? Like your Cabernet, your Chardonnay from California. Like, why did you select those grapes, and how is it working with them in California?
Yeah, when I first started, I helped plant a tiny Pinot Noir vineyard. And then ultimately at that time, particularly in California in, '04, Syrah was slated to be the next big thing. It was like, Syrah is going to take over the world. So everybody was planting Syrah and grafting Pinot vineyards, ironically, onto, to Syrah. And that was at the same time that Sideways kind of took off. So Pinot was growing. Syrah had been growing. But again, I wasn't familiar with all these different grapes. Santa Barbara today grows 70 different grape varieties. We have such a unique growing zone. But at the beginning, I wasn't aware of that. And so I started with Pinot, Syrah, and Gewürztraminer. I loved Gewürztraminer. So I would do like skin fermented Gewürz 30 days. People thought I was crazy. Anyway, and then in 2010, my dear friend, Mike Seguin, he has a winery called Cayena, and he focuses all on sort of Grenache and other things now. But at the time, it was pretty Grenache based. And he had extra fruit. And he said, are you interested? I have too much fruit. I have 1.5 tons of Grenache available if you want to sort of try it out. And I thought, sure, that sounds cool. I knew nothing about Grenache. Maybe I'd had a couple of Grenaches in my life up until that point. I thought, oh, how fun. Again, my intention was just to kind of experiment and have fun and educate and get more involved. And so I took this fruit in. It was a very cold year. We picked it like at the end, right before Thanksgiving in 2010. And everything that I had been doing to Pinot and Syrah, I had sort of had applied to the Grenache. And I quickly realized that this is a completely unique grape that does not behave like Pinot or Grenache. It's its own entity. And so that whole vintage, I kept trying to figure out, what is this grape? And I just became enthralled with it. I thought this was a mystery. And I really realized, gosh, there's so much, to sort of move beyond. And so I just decided to keep learning on my own. And so I kept looking for other Grenache. Again, in our area in Santa Barbara, we're very Pinot Noir and Chardonnay focused because we are so cool climate, and rightfully so. They grow beautifully here. It's pretty much like Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, a gap, Syrah, a gap, and then kind of everything else. So it's not like we're swimming in Rhone varieties. There's more planted today than there was even when I was, working with it back then. And so I just kind of kept getting more involved to try and figure out, well, what do these grapes do? And then, now I'm doing Syrah and now I'm doing Grenache. And someone's like, oh, you should do Mourvedre. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. What's that? And then I worked with Mourvedre. And so because I don't have my own vineyards, I work really closely with all the growers that I do work with. And so, and I'm flexible. On the one hand, it's, not having your own space, you're flexible, you can adjust production as needed. Also, you're kind of expendable. People are like, oh, no, we're going to push you out and get this. So I kept exploring new grapes or new vineyards in our area. And I just became more and more intrigued. And then in 2014, somebody had planted Grenache in Santa Rita Hills, which people involved in wine kind of understand that Santa Rita Hills and Santa Barbara is Pinot Noir and Chard country. And that changed everything for me. I thought, oh my gosh, had no idea what I was looking for. I didn't even know that it existed, and this is what it is. And so from that point forward, we've been gently encouraging growers that we work with to plant more Rhone varieties. So now our whole focus is very cool climate, Grenache, Mourvedre, Roussanne, Grenache Blanc. We just introduced a Picpoul Blanc, all Santa Rita Hills. And so, I love the intensity of flavor, the fruit, and that botanical character. There's so many variables involved and so many characteristics in this. And people think we're crazy. They're like, why would you plant Mourvedre on a north-facing slope in the Santa Rita Hills? And I'm like, you're right. You're totally right. And I'm not saying you're not crazy. I'm not crazy. And yet, in our growing region, cool climate generally means short season, right? Cold and short. And for us, it's cold and very long. So we're, bud break in mid-March, and we're not picking Mourvedre until mid-November. And it's like this perfect cluster with a brown stem. And it's, we're excited if it gets to 22 bricks. And again, the whole idea is not like, oh, I want to do X or I want to do Y. I just want to really understand this is such a unique place. And what do these grapes taste like from here. And so I just kind of became minorly obsessed. I don't know. It's like every day I'm like, oh my God, what's going to happen now? Oh my God, I'm so excited. Oh my God, it's growing season, and it's really just shifted my whole perspective on sort of what is ripeness and what is fruit. And anyway, it's been really, really exciting.
Can you talk about what's your favorite part of the winemaking process? Is there like a moment that just gives you absolute goosebumps every single time?
Yeah. The first pick of the year is always very, very exciting. And then, that first scent of fermentation in the winery, I'm sure everybody says it. It's just, on the one hand, we think, oh God, a year is so long, but a year, it goes by so fast, particularly in wine. You're like, oh, I got one more year. And then it's like, oh, we're literally in harvest already, and it's also funny because every time you're in, the winery and you're in harvest, you're like, oh, I'm never going to forget that. I'm never going to forget that formula. I'm never going to forget. And then 9 months later, you're like, oh yeah, what is that again? You got to go back to like, look at the equation. But yeah, it's being there and it's so focused, right? During harvest, that's your only priority, in the way that I work and in the way that our small business works, it's, we were saying, the fun parts and the not so fun parts. So I'm ordering toilet paper and I'm ordering cheese for the restaurant and I'm making sure people are showing up on Thursday and oh, I got to fix this window and I'm going on a sales call and I'm invoicing. And I'm going to the vineyards and I'm, meeting people for a vineyard tour and I'm hosting a group, tomorrow for XYZ or we're doing a wine dinner. It's all of those things which encompass what we do. And the beauty of harvest is that's your number one priority, right? You're so focused, you're so driven for that goal. You work all year for that in the vineyards and you're kind of tracking and navigating. But when that fruit comes off, it's like there's nothing else more important because you have one opportunity each year to kind of figure that out and make it so that the start of that, I guess it's like, if you're doing a round the world marathon, you get first mile 1 and you got 1,000 more miles to go. So you just gotta dig in and focus. But that's the most like, oh, it's like your whole brain just shifts into a whole different zone. And that's exciting.
Wearing many hats, right, Sonja? Many hats. Explain to Bridget, this is one of my favorite parts of your story. Who is Clementine Carter and what does it stand for? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, Clementine Carter is a character in my favorite Western. It's called My Darling Clementine. And my dad and I, he, sweet man, he passed away last summer. But we watched Westerns together all the time. So again, he came from Yugoslavia at the time. And so their understanding of American culture really when they were living, back in Yugoslavia was Westerns. That's kind of what they were getting. And so when they came to the States, my dad was like, oh, I get to, see more of these Westerns. And so I grew up with my dad watching Westerns. And it was just a really beautiful experience. And, I loved cowboys and I just loved the whole experience of watching these movies, particularly with my dad. And so a number of years ago, we were watching this film, My Darling Clementine, and I think it's like 1948. John Ford directed, black and white, Henry Fonda and Victor Mature. And it's this very standard story of the gunfight at the OK Corral for those of listeners who watch Westerns. But in this version of the story, which my dad and I had seen, 10 different versions of, there's this woman named Clementine Carter. And in the film, she's a fictional character because she doesn't exist in any other version of this story. She travels in the late 1800s across country by train by herself, which is relatively rare, looking for the love of her life. And when she arrives in Tombstone, she finds her love, and her love is unrequited. And yet she still finds a reason to remain in this new territory and have a new life and a new love. And she's just a woman on a journey. It was this very sort of, iconic sort of experience. And again, very valuable to me, particularly kind of being a woman and kind of making that similar-ish journey, kind of going out west by myself, not really having an intention or having some idea. And then the whole system just kind of turns upside down. You've got to figure out a way to sort of remain and make value out of your decisions. And so when it came time to kind of pick a name, I mean, my name is Sonja Magdevski and I love my name. It doesn't sound as zingy and pretty as Clementine Carter. And so it was just kind of like an alter ego, like a way to kind of live a different life through a character and experience things. And I just loved the name. And so we took it, and we started making Clementine Carter back in 2015. So it's been pretty fun.
I really love that you connect that. And I'm sorry that your father passed. So I want to send you my condolences as well. But I love that you tied in what you do, for a living, your day to day, your work, your creativeness, back to your roots and things that matter. I think it's so important for everything that we do, right?
Well, we have to, all of us come to what we do with a particular point of view, right? And so particularly in this industry, in this business, on the scale that, in my scale, it's like I don't have a marketing budget. Not that I don't want a marketing budget. It's not like, I don't want to market. It's like, of course I want those things. We don't have that. And so, what else do you have? You have intention, you have focus, you have sincerity, you have a point of view, you have something that keeps driving you day to day. And then you kind of keep on track with your mission, and it just keeps you focused and it prioritizes your goals and your decisions. And so, if it's not personal on this level, I don't, sometimes, I have a dear friend who works in beauty and she'll be like, oh, no, they're just building that business to sell it. And I would think, why would you just want to work so hard just to sell it if it's working? I don't understand. And I guess I understand, yes, on the end, there's this big monetary reward. And sometimes I think, well, unfortunately, that big monetary reward is not sort of a driving factor for me. And I'm like, well, that's foolish. How do I get that bug in my brain?
Wow.
But I haven't found a way to infuse it yet. But it's, it's like if it's not personal, then it just doesn't make sense for me,
Sonja, where do you see the winery going, right? Like, what's your vision? Zero marketing budget, but a really dedicated winemaker. Where do you see it going? Where do you want it to be?
Well, thankfully, working with you, Jessica, at Domain and Estates, and, we opened Texas and Hawaii. That's exciting to me, the wine industry is very, very, very slow. Everything we do is slow. On the one hand, it's infuriating because you're like, oh my God, this takes forever. It's, again, one whole year. And by the time we plant, it's everything about it is very slow. On the other hand, the beauty of it is because it's so slow, we get to slow down and just relax and experience something for a moment. We don't have to be crazy and rushing every second. And so, having done this now for 20 years, I feel like we're just getting our stride, right? Because it's so slow. And we're also, again, going back to the initial conversation of, you're doing it by recipe, and then you kind of figure out halfway through, oh, this is what turns me on. This is how we kind of keep this going. This is what makes sense to me. And then you just kind of keep working on that. And so even though each year it's kind of the same vineyards and the same grapes, every vintage is totally different. And so we get to sort of, as much as we can, quote unquote, perfect it, which is impossible. Again, going back to that idea of how do we keep making this better? How do we keep cementing our place, and how do we keep spreading the word? And so, when people are like, oh, we want to help you sell this wine, or we're interested in working with you, that is just crazy making in my head. I'm like, really? That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. And so those things are really exciting. And so, I'm small. We're about 2,500 cases. I am in no way opposed to growth. I would love to grow. But also, as a self-funded sole proprietor, everything is very conservative in this growth. And so how do we move forward and make sure that we're on stable footing, and, take those risks as needed? I found that, now 20 years in, I sometimes am a little more risk averse than I was before. And I think, oh, well, you have to kind of keep reframing that. If you have, if someone's like, oh, I have an opportunity for you, you can do X. Like, okay, well, if I'm going to spend $2,000 doing this, how else could I spend that money? What is the best spend? What is the best return? And so the goal, two things, keep focusing on what we're doing, keep kind of improving and working with these Rhone varieties in the Santa Rita Hills, keep that messaging going. What we're doing is relatively unique. And again, it's pretty quirky. All whole cluster Mourvedre from the Santa Rita Hills is not everyone's jam. And I completely understand that. And yet there's enough intrigue and beauty there to kind of keep the system going. And people always say like, oh, well, who do you want to be like? Who do you want to emulate from blah, blah, blah. And I say, no one, they're the inspiration because they've done it and they've been so dedicated and committed to it. And so then how do we find our own sort of dedication and commitment to kind of keep moving forward? So yeah, doing more of what we're doing, spreading the word. And again, I started off as a journalist, as a writer. And I keep having these little tabs, in notebooks or in, my computer of ideas that I want to kind of keep doing. So I do write about wine, for our local publications and for myself, regularly. I would like to incorporate more of that because it just feeds a whole nother part of me and it kind of keeps the system going. So those two things are where I see it. Would I love to be in all 50 states? That would be cool, but that doesn't seem feasible in the next 10 years. But
you never know, Sonja. You just
never know.
Never know. Sonja, can you tell us what your dream collab would be, whether it's wine, food, or just something totally wild?
Yeah, two things. We kind of tried to start it a couple of years ago. My dream collab, there's two things that I really love. One, my whole family in Macedonia, particularly my dad's side, comes from a apple growing region. And when we were there in 2003, I hadn't been in a number of years. I took my whole family and my dad, my mom, my brother, and we were kind of, going through my dad's villages. And there was all this conversation where my dad grew up as kind of like the apple capital of Macedonia. Now, Macedonia is a very tiny country, so I'm not saying it's like conquering the world, but in this small country, his region is known for growing apples. And then I thought, oh, and, everyone's looking for kind of rural development and ecotourism. And so I have a dear friend, because when I had my Fulbright scholarship to study ethnic issues, you have to work with the embassy there. And a dear friend of mine, a whole nother crazy story. I met her at the embassy. Our moms ended up being best friends growing up in high school, and we had no idea that that was the case. Anyway, so she and I are still friends today. And she's just a force. And so I talked to her when I was there and I was like, Borka, why isn't there any hard cider in Macedonia? Like, I don't understand. There's apple juice, there's wine, there's whiskey, there's beer. There's no hard cider. Like,
that is weird.
So weird. And I thought this would be so interesting to start like a little women's co-op cider, production. And so we started looking into all of these things. And then, my dad was sick. And so we kind of sidetracked it for a little bit. But that's always one of the things that I think would be super interesting. And again, it's very time consuming. You kind of have to be on the ground. You need to have funding and, get grants and all of those things, which is not impossible. It's just, like, where's the focus? So that's one of the projects that I would really love to do. And another one is a food project in Macedonia. And then again, and like spread it globally, globally as far as we can, bring it to the States. I think it'd be cool.
I really hope that you do it. I mean, if the agriculture is already there with the apples that's such a great gap to fill. And cider's delicious.
Delicious.
Oh my God, it's so good. And there's all different varieties now of ciders, which is so cool. Yeah. You can do dry, you can do sweet, rosé. Like there's all these like crazy ciders that are like coming out now.
Yeah, we do once a year. We do a different wine cider combination every year. Since 2014. So we've done, last year it was, last year we did a skin fermented Gewürztraminer with Pink Lady apple. So every year it's a different grape and a different apple. And then we do Semillon and we've done Claret, we've done Gruner, we've done Mourvedre, Grenache Blanc, all kinds of different grapes. And we blend it with a different apple, 50-50, and then we hand bottle and bottle condition. It's pretty fun. But yeah, I mean, the idea is endless. People are doing everything, with ciders and grapes and beers and all kinds of things. So yeah, we just got to get back on track and kind of look for funding and figure that out. But we'll keep you posted. I'll be back on to talk about it.
for sure. We would love that. We would love that. Of course, samples though, for that podcast. Sonja, before we go, I'm just curious, like, what would you tell, a young person walking into a store and saying, I have $10 in my pocket. What should I buy? Where should I look? Should I go to California? Like, what grapes are interesting? Like, if they're not fans of wine, how should they start the adventure?
Oh boy. Being very, very open. And if that person has no idea of what they're looking for, maybe focus on if there's an occasion, or if it's you just want to learn something, or you just want to bring it to a party. But again, is the party a barbecue? Is the party a dinner party? Is the party a couple girlfriends hanging out? Is it you and a date that you're taking, to the picnic or whatever? And so I guess, focus on what the occasion is or the event. Again, even if it's just, most importantly, if it's just education and learning on your own, like I want to taste the wine and learn something today, then be very open to the opportunities and to the person assisting you in that wine space. Because the beauty of tasting and the beauty of trying is the more you taste and the more you try, the more you learn what you like and what you don't like. People I say, oh, I don't want anything sweet, or I only like sweet, or I only want this. And then we kind of confuse like sweet with fruity or, all kinds of things. And so just being very open and also kind of approaching it like food. People, no one ever walks into a restaurant and says, I've never had those kind of French fries before, so I'm not going to have them. You're going to say, oh, I really want to taste those French fries. They're delicious. And so kind of open yourself up the same way with wine. The exploration is what is so exciting. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
I think that's great. I think that's perfect. Great advice. Open-minded is the key really to a lot of things, but especially in the wine world. Sure. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your story. It's so always lovely to see you and your energy. Sonja, your energy is unparalleled. We love it. It brings me joy to share time with you. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on Served Up. On behalf of Jessica and myself, I want to wish you some great health, Sonja, and a lot of peace. And I can't wait to have you back on the show.
Thank you very much. I'm so honored to be with you and so delighted that you asked, and I'm coming back hopefully as often as you'll have me. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks for listening. Served Up is brought to you by Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits. Produced by Zunu.online. Music by We Killed the Lion can be found on Spotify. Make sure to subscribe to be notified of our future Served Up episodes. Cheers.